You might know about the individual differences in speech sound, right? The idea is that every individual speaks differently, but still, those common features, which are the identification of a community, we expect that individuals from a specific community would be using shared features. They would share some of those features of their speech, right? And on the basis of those shared speech, they make a community, right? So in this session, we are going to discuss the community-based features, and then how to view the individual-based feature, right? In order to have a community-based sample, we specifically design methodology for speech, for the selection of speech. Like one example is that when we are using instruments, our instruments are quite refined. We are using sophisticated instruments, right? And then we are selecting material, which is in items like word list, okay, which discount the individual differences, right? And very little chance for the individual differences is available, right? And the informants can also be like more than one in case you want to have the maximum purely community-based data, right? And the tokens may be more than one. Like for example, you are having one sound, so you can use different context for the similar sound, and then you can have like more than one speech samples from the same individual, right? So that you can have means and averages, right? For example, if I'm taking the data of Urdu speakers, I would use words and I would ask my informant to repeat that word more than once, like for 3 repetition, okay? And then I would be, for example, I'm to take the length of a specific Urdu vowel, right? So I would take the sample from my one individual 3 times, okay? So that I can have that individual's mean and average of the length of that vowel, right? Similarly, when I'm using one person's average, then I can collect 10 persons, 10 averages, and then one average of all those 10 values. So that would reduce the individual differences to a greater level. So that's an important methodology. And then remember that the quality is relative, right? The quality is needed to be relative when you are to analyze speech, right? But that's also an important point in the discussion of vowels. We have been doing that the space, the relative space concept of vowels, that vowels are articulated, they are, produced from a relatively modified and expected space from the cavity, right? But remember that the individual values may be absolute, right? And they would be different. And the example is like when you are to take the length of schwa, for example, in Urdu or any other language. So the schwa, if average is, right, for example, 60 to 70 millisecond, right? So when it comes to an individual level, then that value may be, the absolute value may be coming down. Like in some cases, it may be 50, right? Or in some cases, it may be going up to 70. But when we take the means and the averages, then that would reduce those individual differences, right? And then in order to analyze individual properties, individual features, we can focus on some of the features from spectrograms, right? Individuals, a particular individual would speak always within quite similar manner, right? This would very simply, in a very general notion, this means that the person would use similar phonetic quality because the articulators inside the vocal tract and also the size of the vocal folds, that would remain similar. The size would remain similar. And you may remember that we discussed this idea, the shape of the vocal tract and also the configuration of the vocal tract inside the vocal tract, right? That does count, right? So the phonetic quality would be similar for one individual. So you can think about those individual features on the basis of which you can claim that this is spoken by the typical one individual, right? And then the relative positions will be the same, but the absolute values would be different. The absolute value of an individual may not be like similar always, right? But it would be relatively similar when you take that person's particular sample of that person in a particular context, right? So that's the idea that how can we take a speech in individual terms, right? And reducing it from the community-based features, right? Like the fourth frequency, okay? We have been talking about the first three formats, but if we talk about the fourth frequency, then the fourth frequency can give us some indicator of the head size, okay? The sinus cavities, which are coming from the head to the nostrils, to the nose cavity, basically. So that can also be analyzed further to make or to determine the individual features. And then one particular way of analyzing individual speech is in the aspirated sounds. Like for aspiration, the type of aspiration and the length of aspiration would be quite similar in the case of the typical same individual, right? So that can also give us some hints that the speech is produced by the same personality, the same individual. And we can further use the mean pitch because a person would be speaking almost in neutral circumstances, almost in the same mean pitch, right? And the range of the fundamental frequency would be similar. So these are the hints through which we can consider a speech which is spoken by a typical specific one individual. And then we can further use methodologies and sampling techniques on the basis of which we can make a speech as the sample of community other than the individual differences. So that's an important discussion.